Hello, English 1A. There's a really loud noise. Hello, English 1A. This is another short video series about the research argument essay. This is going to be one of two for introductions and conclusions. So we're going to talk about how to begin and end your essay. This is part one, so we're going to be talking, obviously, about introductions. Okay, so the introduction is sort of like a story, in that it's the part of the story where you get the background information, the exposition. It's when the once upon a time thing happened. So you have, let's say, once upon a time there was a cat named Buttons who lived in an apartment complex with a bunch of people. And Buttons really wanted, etc., etc. So it's the part of the story that prepares your reader for the action in your research argument. The introduction is the part of the essay that prepares them for the argument. So, introductions are for your reader the first impression of the writing. It's a great place to edit and avoid having typos, mistakes, grammar errors, and stuff, because it leaves this sort of, it doesn't represent you as awesome as you are. So it's the first impression of your writing. It's the first impression of the topic or issue. So if this is the first time the reader has ever heard about this topic, you might be letting them know who's involved, what their life is like. So you could change people's minds or set the first impression of an entire group of people and what's going on with them in the introduction, not just for your essay, but in general. And it's also the first place where they hear an idea that you believe in. Hopefully you believe in your thesis statement, because that is the part that you present at the very end of the introduction. Introductions, when they're well done, they should also inspire the reader to read the rest of the paragraphs. As you know, in life, there's a lot of different things that you can do with your time. And if a reader sits down and takes some of their time to read your essay, it's a wonderful thing. So you want to make sure that it's worth their time, not just because you're saying something important, but you're also saying it in a way that is structured, easy to read, clear, and by the end, which we will talk about in the conclusion section, rewarding. And I did stars because I couldn't help myself. All right, so the purpose of the introduction. The purpose of an introduction is to gain your reader's interest, provide contextual information, and state the purpose of the essay. So sort of like this section where I'm talking about the purpose of the introduction is really to present the purpose. It goes something like this, like, here's something interesting about this topic. Here's information about this topic. Some people are arguing stuff about this topic. Here's what I'm arguing about this topic. So it's all of the stuff that they need in order for the body paragraphs to make any sense at all. And one thing I want to say about the introduction, it is typically, almost always, and definitely for this class, it should be one paragraph, and not a paragraph that goes on for a really long time, but a paragraph, maybe 3/4 of a page is a good place to aim. It's okay if it goes a little over because it's a lot of stuff to add. So here are the parts of the introduction. There's the hook, and there is the context, the transition, and the thesis. So we will go over each one of these in just a moment, but this is what each part should do. So the hook is all about attracting attention to your argument, making the reader invested in it and wanting to read it. The context is all about informing them about the topic that the essay is going to be about. Not everything about it, but just enough so that they're able to understand what's going on in the rest of the essay. From there, you do a transition, and that transition intensifies the topic. So before that, they just have facts. Next thing they find out is, oh my gosh, people are arguing about this. So it makes it more dynamic. And then from there, you state your side of the argument. So that's where you argue. So each part plays a role, and it's really important that they're in the order that they're in, because if you try to attract the reader like at the end of the paragraph, it doesn't really work as well. Okay, so let's start with the hook. The hook is the start of the introduction, and it will make your reader more interested in the topic, if it's well done, of course. So there are common types of hooks. An anecdote, which is just a story. Well, technically they're a little different, but anyway. You can do a surprising fact or shocking statistic. You could do an interesting quote from a prestigious person or an expert on the topic. It could be both. And I couldn't help myself. I didn't know that that animation was there. You can also do a rhetorical question. Those we will exercise with caution. Let's go over some of these. So here's an example of starting it with a story, right? It's a little long. I wouldn't recommend going longer than this, but let's listen to this. So Danny Davis has much to be grateful about. When he became governor of the city of Ashland, he had some considerable hurdles to overcome. The steel mill had closed, leaving 30% of his town's 5,000 residents unemployed. Due to the unemployment, many citizens did not have the money to purchase goods from local stores, causing many local businesses to close. When he became governor, many of the residents' children were beginning to leave town for more opportunities. But Davis found light at the end of this dark tunnel after he was contacted by a representative of Walmart. 2 years later, Ashland is a town still struggling, but rebuilding its resources. And then you notice there's a citation, which means this is a paraphrase from an outside source. Paraphrase is basically anything from an outside source. Please make sure to cite it. So this is a story about a guy who was trying to lead his town. It's a small town, and there was a lot of difficulty economically, and so Walmart looks like is coming in to save the day. We can tell from that also that this is very argumentative because not everybody would agree with Walmart as a savior. But this is one way to introduce. So you provide a person that is experiencing the topic or some aspect of the issue. So this is what it does. When it's well done, it shows the human side of the issue, which is important because if you just have research studies and numbers, none of those numbers really come to life. Like there's a difference between having, like, let's say it impacts 1 million people, right? If it's just 1 million people, a number, it's not as touching to the human soul as it is when we can see one of those million. So it's a nice thing to add. Also, stories are really familiar to us. For some of us, it's really how we learned language. We had stories told to us when we were children. So it's a very inviting way. Again, let's go back to Once Upon a Time. Stories have been something that has been part of most of our lives for the whole time. All right. The next thing is a shocking fact or statistic. And by the way, you're picking one of these, okay? So the shocking fact or statistic, here's one of it. It's half of all American adults will live below the poverty line at some point in their lives. Allison, 10. Again, it's also cited. You will probably have to cite your introduction hook unless it is something that came from your personal experience. But this is basically... It's shocking because it makes it so it seems like everybody or half of everybody is going to be impacted by poverty and have to live in that way. So that's shocking, and that could get a reader interested in what you're talking about. So for these, what they do is they're very efficient. You saw how big the story was. You can just one sentence and it's like boom, there you go. And not just that, but it's also dynamic because it's shocking, right? And one thing I will say about efficient is also something to consider because if you have a lot of context to introduce your topic, let's say you're doing a policy that needs to be explained, you might want to choose one of the quicker, maybe not a story, because the point of the introduction is not to be the essay. The point of the introduction is to get them to the essay, so we want to keep it concise. All right, next one is quote from a prestigious person or an expert. And it could be a prestigious expert. Anyway, so this one is from Aristotle. Poverty is the parent of revolution and crime. Okay, so Aristotle, he's a really big, important thinker from ancient history, and, people love quoting him. So you could do something like that if you were talking about poverty, revolution, or crime, or how poverty contributes to either one of those. But basically, this is sort of the impact that it has on the reader when you have something like, I'm going to write something and I'm going to start with Aristotle, right? So prestigious people think this topic is important, right? So, and if it's Aristotle, it's for a really long time they've been feeling that way. The writer thinks this topic is important. You're kind of connecting yourself with that prestige a little bit. And then you will think this topic is important. So it's kind of like, it's a little, it's like it's telling the reader basically like, all the cool people are thinking about this topic. Don't you want to be cool? That's sort of the effect of it. But nonetheless, it can be a really effective technique, especially if you have a topic that people misjudge a lot or devalue. If you show that important people are thinking about it, it could make someone that sees that way, the negative way, that they're maybe not right. And the last one, and this please exercise with caution. Rhetorical question. Rhetorical questions, they typically only should be in the beginning, like in the hook. You can revisit it in the conclusion, but essays are supposed to be, at least these academic essays, are supposed to be providing answers as opposed to asking questions. But you can do a question at the beginning to sort of get the party started, right? So this one is, who is responsible for the 37.9 million people in the United States living in poverty? That's a pretty big question. That would be a pretty big essay. But nonetheless, the impact of the rhetorical question, it can be really effective because it's thought-provoking. It's basically asking you to think about something. And a lot of times you kind of can't help it. Like, who is responsible for all this poverty? Also, at the same time, it's inviting. It's sort of like the welcome mat for the reader. It's like, hey, do you want to be like involved in the conversation that we're having about this topic? Let me just start with a question, you know? So it's kind of like the meet and greet, I guess, of essay introductory elements. So these are the options. Next, so after you generate their interest, you want to give them the quick version of like the facts about your topic. They need to know things like who's involved and like where it's happening and that kind of stuff. The issue is that sometimes the context, because other parts of the essay kind of like sneak in, like from the body paragraphs, sometimes it can get super long. So if you're finding that your context is getting really long, you can ask yourself, does that piece of information belong in another part of the essay? So the context, after you have used a hook, you want to provide some context or background information about your topic. This context will allow your reader to understand what your topic is about and assist them in understanding why your thesis is important. If you just start off with your thesis, let's say they don't know anything about the topic. Like, let's say, I don't know, let's say I argued that, oh, it's like a book I read. There's regularity in semantic change. Like, what the hell does that mean? You need some introduction, knowing that that was something about linguistics, maybe something about like what semantic change is and why regularity matters, and then perhaps something about why people are concerned about this. So that would be something that is important to have context for. Almost all topics are really important to have context for. It's just that you want to make sure that it is concise. You can, if you're having problems trying to figure out what you want to say for the context, you can ask the reporter's question. Who cares about this topic or is involved? What types of issues or circumstances are related to this topic? Where are the events actually happening? Why are the events caused by this topic happening? And why should people care? And just how is this impact created? Okay, so we have this hook about Danny Davis, the governor, right? So here is the context. Danny Davis's story is not unique. That's the transition there, not to be confused with the later one. As the economy of the country changes, many once thriving small towns have seen their local industries fall victim to a service and knowledge-based economy. Towns like these face a crisis when their local industries fail, like Davis experienced. Many young residents just jump ship and leave. What some of these small communities are beginning to have in common, however, is a rise in the number of Walmarts in their region. This spread of Walmarts throughout the United States has spurred a lot of controversy, whether or not it has been beneficial to the people of our nation. So as you can see, you can understand why he is talking about small towns, what's going on in these small towns, and why it is that they might do something like welcome a Walmart, right? Then you have the transition. Transition and the thesis are very important parts of the introduction, and so I'm noticing that I'm about to run out of time on this video, so I'm going to do part 1 and part 2 of the introduction. The second half will be on the next video. Okay.